Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for coming out. My name is Sean Lubers, and I'm a member of the Adult Education Committee. And I just wanted to introduce our speaker today. Mr. Amahl Thomas is a good friend of mine, a colleague. I teach at Montclair High School with him. And I invited him out today because he, several years ago, during one of our district collaborations, had some really great points to make about the concept of race and racism and tolerance and understanding. And I actually invite him to come out and work with my peer counselors as well and kind of, give us that perspective. And so, well, without further ado, I just want to show you what he has and to share with you and introduce Mr. Amahl Thomas. Welcome.
Hello, everybody. First of all, I just wanted to say thank you to Sean. Like he said, we go back a long time. Not only do we teach together, but in the Claremont colleges, we spent some time together as well. So I just want to say thank you. This is a great opportunity. I am, I guess, a teacher. I also coach football at the Webb Schools. But even through football, I believe, that's a form of teaching. So I'm excited to be here today. I thank the church for having me. I thank the guests for being awake enough to log on. And I hope we can just share some ideas. I do focus on race a lot. It kind of consumes my mind sometimes too often. But I do want to share some thoughts with you, and hopefully we could be interactive. Just kind of logging on, it seemed like we have some folks that would be willing to participate. So I'm going to encourage that wholeheartedly, and I'll try to get this screen shared. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Yes, we can see that.
Yes.
Thank you. And I was really encouraged when I've been in Claremont. I did my master's at CGU. It was CGS back then. And I almost completed my doctoral program. I'm actually in the process of trying to go back. But this area is very familiar to me. I bank at Bank of America, so I've had some good times and bad times there. But when I pulled up in the front, I did notice the sign that said "End Racism." So I'm assuming you didn't put that up for my delight. So I'm glad we can get into these discussions. I just like this quote, John Lewis: "If not us, then who? If not now, then when?" And I think that we are often confronted with times in our life when action needs to be taken. And I know that I've experienced times when situations arise and I didn't really react the way I wanted to, the way I felt my heart truly believes. And when those situations arise, sometimes I feel bad about that, and it sticks with me, and I promise myself I'll never let that happen again. So with that in mind, I like this quote, "If not us, then who? If not now, then when?" So I'm just going to encourage everybody, as I do myself, when those moments do arise, that is your moment. Just a couple little guidelines, I'm sure we won't have any issues here. I just wanted to make sure that we all realize that this is a safe space. We can speak freely. I would love to learn from one another. And we don't need to be perfect. We just need to be better. And this is a mantra I've had in my life for at least 20 or so years. Get better. So when I'm coaching, teaching, before a practice, we start with get better. And after the practice, we end with got better. Those two little words, to me, speak volumes, because it's an admission that you're not quite where you want to be yet. And there's work to be done, and you're willing to do that work. So again, we don't need to be perfect here. I'm going to ask for some opinions of yours. In the event you don't feel like it's the dictionary definition, I just want you to speak freely and don't worry about being perfect. Okay, let's get into this. I don't know how familiar we are with the lady on the screen. That's Elizabeth Eckford. She was one of the Little Rock Nine. I don't know what our familiarity is. Sean and I both teach not only history, but we also teach US history. So I'm going to assume we don't know everything about this situation, but little fun facts. There were originally 10 students that were going, well, there were a bunch of students that wanted to go to this school, but it came down to 10. The night before, one of the students' parents was threatened to lose his job if his child went to school. So they kept that person away. So then that became the infamous Little Rock Nine. But the night before, they all called each other to meet up so they could safely enter Central High School in Arkansas. And Elizabeth Eckford, her family didn't have a phone, so she obviously didn't receive that call. So she met up at the old meeting place while the other 8 were, protected by some ministers and some local officials. So she was alone, and in that moment, she didn't know what to do. And I would love for us to kind of focus on her for a moment, just how this must have felt. First day of school is always tough, just on its own. But
you know the pictures are not coordinated yet.
What's that?
The pictures are not coordinated.
What do you mean?
What picture do you want to have us see?
Okay, we're just looking at this one to the left first.
Can you magnify that?
I don't know. That's a good question.
We can only see John Lewis.
Oh, they're still stuck on the first picture. We're getting assistance.
Don't really know what to do at this point, but we will stop the sharing and reshare. You guys able to see that? Where do we stand?
Yes, yes, we can see it now.
Sorry.
Do you want to try and go forward and then go back and just
Or
make sure
try to
that
go back,
that
maybe?
it's progressing properly?
Do you see me? Do you see this screen?
Safe place, it's a safe
Yeah.
place one, yes.
Okay, great.
Okay, so just a
Great.
glitch.
Okay, so these were the things I referenced earlier.
You want to show them the picture of
Yeah, this is the only one we missed, I think.
okay. I don't know if they saw the picture of a picture name, but going into the.
Yeah, we'll get right to it. Thank you. Okay, so now we can see Elizabeth Eckford.
Yes.
Yes,
Thank
yes, you see that.
Sorry about, thank you for telling me. We could have went pretty far. So the picture on our left, again, kind of refreshing. She gets dropped off and she's basically all alone. And the caption or the question at the bottom says, "Where do you stand?" And I'm just posing that to you. This isn't a threatening question, but I like to think highly of myself in history. I think I would have done great things in certain situations, but I have to be realistic. In my life, I've been confronted with certain situations and I haven't always acted the way my heart would like. But I would like us to just think of maybe moments in our life when we've been one of these 3. I've been the person on the left who has joined in on the bad behavior. I've been the person, and I'm talking about the folks that aren't Elizabeth Eckford. I've been these people in the background who've just stood as bystanders instead of taking action. And the focus of today's conversation is just what action do we take and what causes us to do that action. This picture on our right, the lady's name is Grace Lorch, the lady in the plaid. She was at the first day of school. She was an activist, but she wasn't on that day thinking she was going to have to do anything. and she's from out of town, so she's very foreign to Little Rock, Arkansas. But she just decided, because she saw the young lady sitting there, as you can see in the middle picture by herself, she sensed that it was getting tense. She sensed that it could be a dangerous situation. And I'm just trying to put everything into perspective. She's an outsider. She's a woman, and she doesn't know the ins and outs of policy and practice in that region. But she felt the need to stand there. And I really love the arm, if you can see it, it's a little faint, but she literally places her arm behind Elizabeth Eckford as to protect her. To me, this is courage in action. When we start talking about the picture on the left, ironically, this lady, I don't remember her name right now. I'm trying to have the cursor over her, but she was the most visible agitator that day. She was the one that was yelling at her and screaming at her. They had a reunion between Elizabeth Eckford and this lady, and they've actually written a book, and the lady is ashamed of her behavior then. And this is kind of my overall message. You know, we're in moments of time now that I think we'll look back and be embarrassed about, at least some of us. And we don't know it at the time. Sometimes we're just caught up in the moment. But I think these still pictures kind of capture some of us at certain points of our life. Sometimes we get caught up in the fray. Sometimes we just stand by, which isn't a good thing. It's almost a form of acceptance. And then sometimes we take action that's not popular at the time, but is the right thing to do. This is a famous picture. I don't know if we're familiar with August Landmesser. There is some controversy. Another family said this isn't August Landmesser. It's actually a man by the name of Gustav. But regardless, this is at a 1936 Nazi rally. I think it was a send-off for a ship before World War II. As you can see, everybody is in motion with their arms up, and he is protesting in his own way. If this is August Landmesser, his wife-to-be was Jewish, of Jewish descent. If it's not August Landmesser and it's Gustav, he was doing this because of religious reasons. Either way, it's not popular. And either way, this is potentially a dangerous situation for that person, but in this moment, their beliefs far outweighed what was popular. And this is kind of a blow up of that picture. So what I'd like you to do, let's get a little interactive. I'm going to list 5 words, and you don't have to write them down, but if you could mentally, and we can still see these screens, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. If we could mentally put these words in order of importance to you that you feel that folks should do to one another. So the 5 words are accept, respect, appreciate, tolerate, and understand. So I'll give you a couple of minutes in your mind, just to recap, in order of importance, what you think is most important for humans to do to one another. If you were creating your perfect society, what would be the most important of these words that folks do to one another, and kind of take it on down to the least important. I'm going to ask for a couple of you to share, so please be willing and brave enough to share. Again, I don't think there's going to be any wrong answers here, but I do think it's going to lead to a pretty good discussion. So I'll give you about another minute or so to put those in order of importance. And I think I'll ask 1 or 2 of you here. Okay. And maybe we'll just give them a minute. But I'm going to go to you first.
Oh, okay. I think understand would, in my case, would be first. Respect would be second. Accept would be third. Appreciate would be fourth. But tolerate, I don't think if you do all those others, you're going to need to tolerate anybody. You've already accepting it. So that's the order I put it in.
I love it. And what's your name?
Bill,
Bill. And do they know you, Bill? The folks that are online? Do they know you?
they might.
Okay,
Been
okay,
a member
okay.
for a long time. Long
They
time.
should, they should. Okay, is anybody willing to share online? If I could get a couple folks.
I'll share.
Thank you.
I totally agree with the understand part.
Okay,
And uh, I just feel that way. I mean, I had polio when I was 7 as a kid, so I always felt kind of like an outsider as well. And I just think that, you know, getting people to understand your situation and realizing that you're just like everybody else is the first step for us to connect with each other.
and is your name Marcy?
It is.
Okay, I was just taking a guess there. Thank you, Marcy. So
Uh-huh.
what would be the rest of your list?
I was pretty much in agreement with the way that the first person listed it.
Okay,
Yeah, we were almost right on the same track.
okay, let's start a little controversy. Where did you differ?
I don't know if I did. I was trying to keep track, but I had understand as 1, respect as 2, accept as 3, appreciate as 4, and 5 as tolerant.
That was exactly the same as Bill.
Okay.
Okay. And usually, so I've done this with all levels, elementary school students, middle school, high school, undergrad and graduate students. This is the first time I've done it with a church, so I'm going to add that to my list next time. Usually the number 1 is your number 1 for a reason, like you're pretty passionate about that. And usually the 5th one is as well. The other 3, it varies, but they sometimes flow together. Why did you have the last one as tolerate?
Well, I found that tolerates, I don't know, in a way, I just find tolerance just means you put up with.
Hmm.
You know, to me, it's not, how can I say it? It's not as kind.
These are good ums, by the way.
I have a different view.
Okay. And
I would
talking?
put, Jackie,
Hi, Jackie.
hi. I would put tolerate first
Okay.
because you may not accept, respect, appreciate, or understand, but the least you could do is tolerate, to live in peace with someone, okay? I don't agree with anything you say, but I'm not going to burn your house down. You know, I'm not going to beat you up. I'm not going to encourage other people to do. That should be first, actually. Tolerate.
Gotcha.
Then you could get to the rest of them.
And what was your order?
It was tolerate. Let's see. Understand,
Okay.
respect, appreciate, and then you can accept.
Okay. So I don't want to speak for you, Jackie, but are you putting these, it sounds like it's a process.
It's a process.
Okay.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay. And you had accept last, right?
Right.
Okay.
Because I think you have to be able to do the other things in order to accept. If you
Okay.
even get there, you may never get there.
I'm with you. Thank you. Anybody else online? Maybe one more person.
I would like to put respect first.
Okay.
Respect another person, as a human being, as whether it will end up at your friend or your foe or whatever. I think you first have to respect that it is a human being, a person in his or her own right.
I like it.
I put tolerate last as being slightly negative also. So I put that one last. I think understanding comes later in the process. To me, I would respect them and I would accept them. I would learn to appreciate them even before I really understood them.
Okay.
And then tolerate is slightly negative to me.
Okay. And your name's Annalise?
That's correct.
Okay. Well, thank you, Annalise. Anybody want to chime in? We got some pretty good points there.
I would, I think they all are interrelated. I think you can't have one without the other. And I think that as a society, all of them are equally as important. So it's hard for me to rank them. I mean, I think you can't have one without the other. That would be my thinking.
Okay.
I'm Tomas.
I can see that. That's a great first name, by the way.
Thank you.
My last name's Thomas, so.
Thank
Well, that was
you.
a great point. That was a great point. Anybody else want to chime in? All of our people here?
Sure, this is Shirley. The word that seems not to be appreciated so much is the word appreciates. I just want to put in I put that maybe second after understand. And if I internally just appreciate, I don't know that that's something the person knows or feels. But as an elementary classroom teacher, when I appreciate another student and that person is different, the whole class begins to appreciate that person. And so I think outward appreciation goes a long way.
Love it. Love it. What would your last one be, Shirley? Just curious.
Oh, definitely tolerate. That's such a bare minimum.
Okay. Thank you. What do you guys think?
Well, I believe after processing this, for a number of years, I have approached in the past tolerance and being able to tolerate each other as almost the only aspect. So in my early years, my early education, it was all about tolerance. It was like getting along, and I've come to learn that the other aspects of it, so understand today would be my number one. And the main reason is because even if you think of conflict or differences that people have, one of the major aspects of conflict mediation is we get people out of their positions and into their interests. And our interests are really, if you think about humanity, it's to understand one another more so. You can tolerate someone and hate them, and you can tolerate someone and exclude them. You can tolerate someone and still create laws that don't allow them to be equal. But when you truly understand someone, regardless of what their position or background is, the understanding comes to the point where you truly are now empathetic toward them in a different way than any of the others.
Gotcha. Could we hear that online?
Yes.
Okay, great, great. So first of all of the answers were positive, and the beauty is these in a lot of respects, no pun intended, are words that should be looked at as positives. Tolerate got a lot of attention. I thought Jackie did a great job explaining how her mind wraps around that word. I heard some people talk about tolerate being a negative word, which I'll get into, and I probably agree with, but I hope we can appreciate what Jackie said in respect to tolerate. This is my list, and it's not the right list, although I think it is, but it is the list that I operate on. And I will say this, I've done this most with high school students, and respect is their number one. And it's ironic because what I do in a classroom setting, I put them in groups of 4 or 5. First, I have them do their individual list and then put them in groups and try to come up with a group list, which is interesting. By and large, respect is number one for almost every single list. But ironically, when I'm talking to group 1 and they're giving me their list, group 5 is being disrespectful and not listening. And then as fate would have it, when I get to group 5, by the time I get to them, group 1 is off, not paying attention as well. So that's why for me, understand would have to be number 1, because respect is that important to me. But I have levels of respect. So I respect my mom more than anybody on this Zoom because we just met. But to give you a little backdrop of my mom, white lady, had me in 1969, 2 years after Loving versus Virginia, which made interracial relationships legal. She faced a lot, and she was a single mom. My dad, great man, so I don't want to create a narrative that's not there. They weren't a good match. But I lived with my mom primarily, and single white mom raising a black child in the early 70s was not pleasant, but instilled so much pride in me, made me feel loved. I felt super special. I think I am confident the way I am now just because how special my mom used to make me feel. But my understanding of my mom's plight puts her way up above almost all others. And I think my wife is listening, so I have to throw this in. We have 5 children, so my respect level for my wife is to the moon. So for me, there are levels of respect. I know Sean Lubers very well. I know a lot of his background. I know his family, his 2 children. So my level of respect for Sean, and being a fellow teacher, hearing him next door to me every day, passionately teaching these kids, my level of respect is higher for Sean than probably everybody on this Zoom. No offense to anybody on this Zoom. So my respect is based primarily on my understanding of the individual. So respect would be number 2. Appreciate, to me, kind of going back to Shirley, appreciate is underappreciated. I think when you appreciate somebody, especially openly, I think that goes a long way. Except I guess I'm just getting to the stage of my life where acceptance isn't as big a deal. But I will point out in high school, this is really high on students' list because they're trying to be accepted and fit in. And then I would put tolerate really low just because this is the one word, and I'm really going to use Jackie's word. This, to me, Jackie, is the starting point. I think everybody does tolerate everybody. The fact that, you know, we move out of the way and we don't just run through a crowd and run over people. And I think we tolerate crowds and things we don't like. There's some citizens that'll speak out every time something doesn't jive well with them, but most of us put up with stuff. I am going to use your words, Jackie. Tolerate keeps us from burning people's houses down. I thought that was a great example. Until you have a bad day. So I think if we have that mindset, I'm not going to burn their house down, that's on a good day. On a bad day, you will burn their house down. And that's why I have a problem with tolerate, going back to Thomas, as the only thing. I think these all play together. But you will see in classrooms, I hate to keep referencing classrooms, but I'm a teacher. It'll say teaching tolerance as the only thing up there. Now, if it said all these other things, and sometimes they do, I'm just pointing out something sticking out in my mind. But if they pointed out teaching respect and teaching appreciation and acceptance and understanding, that would, but when the only thing up there is teaching tolerance, that does concern me because we're teaching folks to put up with and not burn people's houses down.
Right. And when I said that, as you mentioned, I saw it as a process. That's the least you can do.
Yes.
If you can't get there,
yes,
forget it. I mean,
yes,
you're not even, shouldn't be in the human race.
And to Jackie, to your point, there are people that don't tolerate. So
that's right. That's
and
right.
we wish, I would say January 6th, we had a lot of folks that threw that out the window. And we wish they would have just tolerated that day. Just yesterday, there was a shooting in Buffalo.
Yes.
Tolerance would have been pretty good there. But, again, the problem with tolerance is you run into bad days. I usually use the analogy of a neighbor in an apartment, and some of us maybe have had that experience. And they're playing that music, whatever that music is, and you tolerate it, but the night that you have to study or you have something important to do the next day, or you're coming off of a bad day, that's when the banging on the wall starts happening, and turn that stuff down starts happening, and it could lead to bad things. So out of those those 5 words, tolerate is the one that could lead to bad situations. But I think everybody had great points. We're all on positive missions here. I do just want to highlight understanding. Sean, you did a great job explaining the importance of understanding. There's a activist maybe we're familiar with. She was big during the 70s and early 80s with feminism, but her quote is, "Life is the first gift, love is the second, and understanding is the third." Here's the tough thing. Understanding takes time and effort. Tolerance doesn't. It's kind of the easiest on that list. But if we're trying to put in some work and trying to get better, trying to move, for me, towards understanding is where the work is to be done. So let's get into this before we get out of here. And I hate doing this. I'm looking at the time. I definitely don't want to drop this big bomb and then walk away. But I did see it on the sign outside. If we could just, I was going to give it a couple minutes, but just if somebody would be willing to offer what racism means to them. And sometimes in my experience, racism, prejudice, discrimination, those get kind of blurred. For me, racism is different. I just wanted to know what we're thinking as a community here. I'll go online first.
Well, I mean, I agree with the statement. Racism is a pandemic too, and it's we're living in a time, as you referenced yesterday, and where white supremacy is on the rise in this country, and tolerance is on the decrease. And all of the other terms that on that initial list that we discussed are also on the decrease. So, racism really, all of those statements that you described really on your initial list really describes racism to some degree, in my opinion.
Thank you. Anybody else have a definition of racism?
Well, I think racism is the disregarding, discounting, wanting to eliminate a whole group of people simply based on the color of their skin, because there really is no race involved. Excuse me, I'm gonna sneeze. So it's just putting people down simply on the basis of the color of their skin. It's a ridiculous thing to do, to name.
And Annalise, when you said something to the extent of there is no race. I know I messed that up a little bit. Can you just go in on that?
Well, scientifically, we're all humans. We all have heads and arms and legs and hearts. The color of the skin was probably based on centuries ago, whether you lived in the heat and you had to have protection from the sun, or whether you lived in the cold north and needed light skin to receive the sun. So it's not really racial.
And I don't know you, Annalise, but I do love you. So that was good, good breakdown. There's 1700s is when race kind of became a label. There was a guy by the name of Carl Linnaeus, and we like to categorize things. So I don't blame him, because we categorize wood, we categorize milk. I was at the store the other day and my wife said, I want you to get skim milk. So I literally had to Google what skim, I was like, oh, 1%. But when I went there, there was goat milk, there was 2%, there was whole milk, chocolate milk. There was so much milk, I was starting to go a little stir crazy. But we do that. If you go to Subway, first thing they say, what kind of bread? Well, I just want bread, but there's, 10 options. And then what kind of cheese? Well, I just want, cheese. So as a species, I think we are fascinated by categorization. So there's no wonder that we did this with human beings. But the problem was we started placing value on that. And the folks who could read the literature of the time, that jived well with what they were. So it got very popular very fast. We have students and people that often say that's racist. And I think this word gets thrown around a lot. So I just want to, within, I don't know, the time remaining, just kind of delve into this a little bit. For me, racism is prejudice plus power. And this seems like a pretty simple definition, but if we analyze the word power, the folks that have literally the ability, and I'll say a quick story. I presented this on the same day, this was some years ago, at a summer school class at Montclair High School. So I was teaching students who needed to make up credits. And on the same day, I had this exact same discussion at CGU. I was teaching a class to students, master students. And one of my students at Montclair, I had him the year before in another class, but he was making up world history with me in the summer. And we had a long history. I got to know him very well during the course of the school year. So I threw this at him. The next day he came back and said, I looked up what you said, Mr. Thomas, and it didn't say prejudice plus power. And I said, oh, what did it say? And it had sprinkles of what I said, but it did have different verbiage. And I said, that's funny, where did you get that definition? And he said, Webster's dictionary. And I said, well, you're kind of proving my point, because you're trusting Noah Webster, a man you've never met, over a person you know well and you know to be educated. And I usually have good intentions for students. And I said, when you have the power to literally define words, that is the essence of power. So when we get into these discussions about what power is, because power comes in many forms, as we all know. Money is power in this country, we know that. Might is still power. That used to be the power of the day, who was stronger than who. But governance is power. And far too often we talk about presidents who were racist, and can you believe that president did that? We sometimes fail to remember that Congress, most of them owned slaves at the time. And the Supreme Court, most of them owned slaves at the time. So it was no wonder that legislation was continuing to flow in that way. Sometimes we put it on one or two people, which I don't think is fair. But the reality is it was just how society was. No one was challenging that. In fact, it was getting worse because the people in power were able to define what the laws were. And still today, when we hear about police brutality, I don't know if we're aware, 80% of the United States police force are white folks. 80% of teachers are white. And again, I got to remind you, my mom is white. That's the first woman I ever loved. But when we're talking about Congress, the people who make the laws, excuse me, the Supreme Court who rule on the laws, and then of course the president that enforces the laws, these are all in concert. And these aren't, as I tell my students at Montclair High School, these aren't white people like my mom who interacted with a lot of folks of color and maybe had situations monetarily in their background that made them like, I forget who it was, I think it was Marcy, had people, these folks understood the plight of certain people. It makes it a little easier to understand. But we're talking about people that came from white areas and maybe money, and I don't want to typecast, but if I'm thinking of congressmen and women, these are folks that probably didn't go to a lot of public schools, then went to college, then went to graduate school, and many of them, as we know, are lawyers. It doesn't get more diverse the higher you go. That probably the opposite would be true. So for these individuals to be empathetic, which is what we were talking about, and pass laws and write laws that are empathetic to the people we're talking about, it's almost a joke to expect them to just miraculously get this. So I guess what I'm getting at in analyzing and critiquing what power is, from our positions of power, how do we, if we go back to those pictures at the beginning of Elizabeth Eckford and the man that was protesting the Nazi rally, how do we in our positions of power interfere with what we know as racism? And that's kind of where I'd like to leave this. Obviously, this is a deep conversation, but I've gotten, at least from the 6 or so folks who've spoken, I think we're all on the same page. We had to start with the understanding conversation, and I'm going back to Jackie, because Jackie, yours stood out. You're kind of the star of the show. But I think we were all on the same page, and I think we have the know-how, we have the knowledge. How are we interfering with acts of racism? And I'm not talking about what happened yesterday in Buffalo. That's kind of an extreme act. But when we see certain patterns continuing and we have insight, how are we interfering? I just want to, just because of time, I want to kind of stop there. I do want to say thank you again. I hope some of this checks some boxes in your head, affirm maybe a couple things that you were thinking. I appreciate this, not to overuse these words, but I appreciate the feedback I got, because this was by far, and I'm thinking we're not teenagers, all of us on this, but this was by far the most insightful set of answers I've heard when doing this activity. So I just want to say thank you to the church and to Sean again, and I hope everybody has a great Sunday.
Thanks to you.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Yes, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
I'm
Maybe you
happy-
can come back
I would love to.
and to continue this.
I would love to.
I'm happy you're dealing with our students.
Thank you,
And
Emma.
young-
Many, many thanks.
Thank you, Bill.
Well, thank you as well. From my end, I mean, I think, you know, it was a great facilitation of a conversation that we need to have, that we need to continue to have. And, you know, everyone can play a role in combating white supremacy and racism and homophobia and et cetera. Everyone can play a role. Some people that have hold positions can perhaps, like yourself, I mean, you're teaching and you've taught hundreds of students over your career, and you've transformed their thinking. But even if you're not a teacher, just a community member, everyone has a role. And I think what you stated earlier, and that was, you know, these three images, right? One was attacking the woman, the other was simply not doing anything, and that's just as guilty as attacking, frankly speaking. And the other frame being compassionate. And so we all have a role to play. And what's happening in our society today is the rise of white supremacy, but also the attack of the truth.
Mhm.
And so, you know, when you read 1619, you know, it really talks about the founding of this country, well-researched publication. When you think about Caste by Isabella Wilkinson, when you think about Congressman Lewis and the book that was written about his life recently. The Soul of America. You know, these are publications that are being attacked by the rise of white supremacy in our country. So we all have a role to play. We cannot sit by the sidelines. And yeah, I mean, I will, you know, I'm preparing a letter. You know, I serve as president at Cal State San Bernardino. I will be preparing a letter expressing our condolences to the families at Buffalo. I will get a lot of hate mail because I've done it before, and I know, but that's not going to stop me.
Gotcha.
From taking the position that I'm going to take. And I'll get emails that say, "Don't send me your,
right.
Don't send me that message." But I ignore that. I think it's important to comment on that tragedy that occurred yesterday. So thank you. I really appreciate the conversation.
No, I appreciate everything you just said. And I do think it's on all of us. And I'm glad you brought up all the different groups that are being attacked at this time. When non-gay folks talk about gay rights and gay issues, I think that opens the conversation up. When non-Black folks are talking about Black Lives Matter, I think that, and I don't know that we fully are aware of this, but I'm here to say that goes a long way. There's never been a movement of color in this country that hasn't had the assistance of white folks. And I just think it opens up the discussion in ways that just the insular group can't. So thank you for all your work, by the way. I've heard great things. Sean and I have talked about you a couple times. And in fact, we're in the process of getting Dr. Kendi to come speak to our school.
Yeah, he spoke at Cal State. We have it videoed. If you'd like to take a look at it, I'm more than happy to send it to you. We have a tape of his presentation. Just a great presentation. In fact, we are actually reviewing all of our policies and practices through his lens, through his anti-racist construct. And we're using the Institute at Boston University to help us do that.
That's beautiful. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate you, and I hope you have a great day. I see you, Lynn. How you doing, Lynn? Everybody have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.